Today we're going to be looking at sentences and the common mistakes students can make when writing their own sentences. The first mistake is called a run-on sentence, and linked to that is the comma splice. So what is a comma splice and a run-on sentence? The comma splice and the run-on sentence, sometimes called the fused sentence, are punctuation errors. So that's the key word there. We're going to be looking for incorrect or missing punctuation. What do these terms mean, and how can you correct or avoid these errors? So a comma splice occurs when only a comma separates two independent sentences or two independent clauses. And a run-on sentence or a fused sentence occurs when no punctuation at all separates two independent sentences. It might be easier if we look at an example. This is an example of two independent sentences. So at the moment this is good. There are no mistakes here. So to spot or to identify an independent sentence, we need a subject and we need a verb. That's the minimum requirement. So do we have a subject, Jeff? Do we have a subject here, he? Is he doing anything? He is dishonest and he steals cars. So we have a subject and we have a subject and we also have a verb and a verb in each of the independent clauses. So that's how we recognize independent clauses. So an example of a mistake, a comma splice, would be Jeff is dishonest. He steals cars for a living. So the words are exactly the same, but instead of separating these using a full stop, we're just using a comma to splice between these two independent clauses. So this is a mistake here. This can't happen. It's easy to do when you're writing because in your head it seems to make sense, and when you're writing in your head and putting your ideas down on paper, it's quite easy to forget about punctuation. So you'd be thinking Jeff is dishonest, he steals cars for a living, and in your head that sounds perfectly okay. But when you come to write it down and have somebody read it, it won't make as much sense, or it isn't punctually correct to have this comma here. So when you finish a piece of work, it's important that you go over your writing and check for those sneaky comma splices or run-on sentences that have found its way into your work. So Jeff is dishonest, he steals cars for a living is now a run-on sentence. So we had a comma splice, that's what a comma splice looks like. Now we have a run-on sentence, it just runs on, there's no punctuation here. So Jeff is dishonest, he steals cars for a living. So if we need to change this, we need to separate the sentences by using a full stop. So Jeff is dishonest, he steals cars for a living. Now we're back to where we started with this full stop separating the two independent clauses. So this is correct. The sentences are a little bit short, and if you wrote in sentences like this, short sentences over an extended writing task, it would seem really, really choppy. So we want to extend our sentences at times to make them into compound sentences. And that's what we're trying to do next. So if we use a coordinating conjunction, remember the fanboys, so we're adding one of these fanboy coordinating conjunctions or connectives, and that's for, and, nor, but, or, yet, so. So this now becomes Jeff is dishonest. Use one of these, so he steals cars for a living. Remember, you need the comma before the coordinating conjunction. Or you could have Jeff is dishonest, for he steals cars for a living. The for here means because he steals cars for a living. So Jeff is dishonest, for he steals cars for a living. Or you could even have Jeff is dishonest and he steals cars for a living. So we've added a coordinating conjunction into this comma spliced sentence here. So how to correct a comma splice? I love eating fruit. It is one of my favorite things. Another example here, I love eating fruit. The simple thing to do is just to add the full stop and then remember to put the capital letter in here. Alternatively, we have I love eating fruit, for it is one of my favorite things. because it is one of my favorite things. Or you could have, I love eating fruit, so it is one of my favorite things. Another example here, Hungary is an interesting country. The churches contain some of the finest paintings found anywhere in Europe. Now, this is harder to recognize the comma splice, but we do have one. It's occurring here. We have two independent clauses. Hungary is an interesting country. Full stop. New sentence. The churches contain some of the finest paintings found anywhere in Europe. So that's wrong. We need to add in one of the fanboys. Hungary is an interesting country, and the churches contain some of the finest paintings found anywhere in Europe. You could even have for. Remember, this is like because. Hungary is an interesting country, for the churches contain some of the finest paintings found anywhere in Europe. You could even have but, and each time you use a fanboy, it slightly alters the meaning depending on which coordinating conjunction you use. So Hungary is an interesting country, but the churches contain some of the finest paintings found anywhere in Europe. So the meaning of this one is a little different to the meaning of this one, because if I was to say but the churches, the meaning here is I'm admitting that Hungary is an interesting country, the whole thing is interesting, but what you really want to look at are the churches, because they contain some of the finest paintings you'll ever see. Again, a simple solution is just to separate the clauses by putting in a full stop here and remembering to capitalize on the first word of the new sentence. Now, if we look at how to correct a run-on sentence, this is an example of a run-on sentence, and as you can see, there is no punctuation in this line, but we do have two independent clauses. So we have Dr. Edwards ran to his office. He had just had a brilliant idea. So what we have to do, we have to either separate these two independent clauses using a full stop, remembering to capitalize here on the new sentence, or we could add one of the fanboys. So we have Dr. Edwards ran to his office, for he had just had a brilliant idea. So here we're using the comma and the coordinating conjunction to create a compound sentence. It might be worth you taking a look at these now, and what you need to do, you need to check for possible run-on sentences, and when you spot a run-on sentence, then you should be able to change it in any of the ways that I've suggested, which would either be to create two independent clauses, two separate sentences, two simple sentences, or to combine them using a coordinating conjunction and the comma to create a compound sentence. We're going to look at two more ways now to correct comma splices and run-on sentences. The next two ways are slightly more complicated than the first two ways, and the first more complicated way to correct a run-on sentence or a comma splice is to convert the sentence into a complex sentence. And if we use this sentence here, which has a comma splice here as an example, the new money-making plan was introduced. The gang were eager to try it. So to make it into a complex sentence, you need to add a dependent word. Now, if you're a little bit confused about how to make a complex sentence or what a dependent word is or a subordinating conjunction, you should look at my other video on sentences, simple, compound and complex, and that will give you a full insight into how to create a complex sentence and what a dependent word is, which is also called a subordinating conjunction. Examples of dependent words are here. So if I added one of these words, if it was suitable to the sentence that we've just looked at, say for example when, we would have when the new money-making plan was introduced, the gang were eager to try it. So now we've created a complex sentence by adding one of the subordinating conjunctions, one of the dependent words here. So this now becomes a dependent clause, not an independent clause. A dependent clause because we've weakened it by adding in the subordinating conjunction of when. Again, slightly more complicated, and I will do a separate slideshow on punctuation, including semicolons. We can also use a semicolon to join two closely related independent clauses. So the new money-making plan was introduced, semicolon, the gang were eager to try it. So that again would sort out the comma splice by, instead of using just a comma, you are allowed to use a semicolon, because a semicolon will join two separate independent clauses and they have to be related. So this needs to be related to this. And to recap as an overview, to correct run-on sentences and comma splices, number one, you separate the two independent clauses using a full stop. Number two, join the sentences together using a coordinating conjunction, fanboys. Number three, create a complex sentence by adding a dependent word, which is called a subordinating conjunction. And number four, use a semicolon to connect the two independent clauses, but don't also include a coordinating conjunction. So if you're going to use the semicolon, don't use the fanboys. Okay, thank you.